Let me introduce our next speaker, Sharon Dirckx. Sharon is a senior tutor at the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics. Now, originally from a scientific background, she actually has a PhD in brain imaging from the University of Cambridge and has held research positions in both the UK and USA. Sharon speaks and lectures in the UK, Europe and North America on science, theology, the mind and the soul, and the problem of evil. Recently, she spoke at the Veritas Forum at the University of Oxford. Now, Sharon's appeared on several BBC programmes, including Radio 2 Good Morning Sunday, Radio 4's Beyond Belief, and she's also the author of an award-winning book on suffering, and it's titled Why? Looking at God, Evil and Personal Suffering. I've had Sharon on my show a few times and on that specific issue, and it's a really great book. I do recommend it. In fact, her latest book, though, deals with the issue she's going to be addressing tonight. It's called Am I Just My Brain? And it examines questions of human identity from the perspectives of neuroscience, philosophy, and theology.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. I would love to start by telling you a story from my childhood. An early childhood memory that I have is of sitting by a window on a rainy day, watching the drops splash against the pane. I'm not really sure how old I was. I must have been around 9 or 10. But like all normal children, I spent most of my life racing around, probably on roller skates or playing some sort of ball game. But at this particular moment, I was still, and my mind had time to drift. And I remember a series of questions popping into my head. Why can I think? Why do I exist? Why am I a living, breathing, conscious person who experiences life? Now, I don't really remember where those questions came from. I was raised in a very loving home, but not in a particular religious tradition. And yet the questions were just there, unprompted. Now, I know I'm not the first to have this kind of moment. When any of us sit still for long enough, all kinds of things bubble to the surface of our consciousness. Conscious awareness seems to be central to what it means to be a living, breathing human being. Perhaps the philosopher Dirckx was right in saying that the thing that we know with most certainty is that we are conscious. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. We each have a first-person experience on the world. And as Thomas Nagel put it in 1974, there is something that it is like to be you. But what exactly are you? What exactly am I? What are human beings? Well, this is a question that has occupied people for centuries at every stage of human history. Are we advanced primates? Are we machines? Do we have a soul? Are we just physical beings, or is there more to us than that? The question, what is a human being, asks a question of identity. Now, many answers are offered today on the question of identity. The fashion and cosmetics industry would say, you are your body. The financial world might say, you are your income. The political world might say, you are your influence. And the academy might say, you are what you publish and what you write. Well, neuroscientists have recently weighed in on this question surrounding identity, and they say your brain defines you. This you that you are certain exists is brain activity. Consciousness is brain activity. You are your brain. The choices that you make for good or ill, the personality that you have, the behaviors that you exhibit, even whether or not you hold religious beliefs, are all dictated by the activity in your brain. Now, I don't need to convince an audience such as this how incredible the human brain is. The human brain is more developed in humans than in any other creature. It contains more cells than there are stars in the sky, somewhere between 80 and 100 billion. And every neuron at any one time is sending thousands of impulses to its neighbors at speeds of over 250 miles per hour. I have studied the human brain at close quarters. I will never forget the day when I saw a brain removed from a body. A number of us were there to study the anatomy of the brain, and the first stage was to watch its removal from the body. This was a deeply sobering and reverent experience, commanding utmost respect for the woman who had given her body so that others could learn. But does it follow that everything that it means to be a conscious human being can be explained in terms of brain chemistry and electrical activity? After all, some brilliant scientists believe this. We've already heard about the scientific work of Francis Crick, who co-discovered DNA and won the joint Nobel Prize in 1962. And yet he said this in his book, The Astonishing Hypothesis, a couple of decades later. He said, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. As Lewis Carroll might have phrased it, you're nothing but a pack of neurons. And this hypothesis is so alien to the ideas of most people alive today that it can truly be called astonishing. Well, 50 years later, this hypothesis is far from alien. People on the streets of Coventry are espousing it. Some no longer consider it a hypothesis. It is seen by some as scientific fact. Well, you might be wondering, so what? What does it matter what you believe about what sits between your ears? Well, if we are simply our brains, the implications are notable. As we've already seen in the video played at the start of this talk, there are significant implications for free will. If we are just our brains, then are we really free and able to make meaningful decisions, or do we just do what our brains tell us? Secondly, there are ethical implications. What is the value of a human life? Is personhood dependent on having a fully functioning brain? And if so, what value do we assign to those whose brains are not fully developed, such as the unborn or premature babies, or those with brain damage, or those with degenerative diseases such as dementia and Alzheimer's? And thirdly, there are implications for artificial intelligence. If human consciousness can be entirely explained in terms of brain activity, then what are the implications for AI? Will there one day be conscious androids walking the streets? But this is all to say that the beliefs that we hold on this subject are not just for the neuroscientist and philosopher. They are not niche. They are mainstream, and they have far-reaching implications. Now, AI is improving speed and accuracy in all kinds of areas of life. But processing ability and conscious awareness are not the same thing. Just because an algorithm appears to be conscious does not necessarily mean that they are conscious. We only need to try and have an in-depth conversation with Siri, Google, or Alexa to highlight this. My children recently struck up a conversation with Siri which went like this. Siri, how are you? I'm fine, thanks for asking. Siri, who made you? I, Siri, was designed by Apple in California. Siri, are you a person? Sorry, Sharon, I've been advised not to discuss my existential status. Siri, why are we here? I don't know, maybe the Genius Bar folks can answer that. Siri, why do we exist? To have conversations like these. Siri, why do you exist? I process, therefore I am. Just because an algorithm appears to be conscious does not necessarily mean that it is conscious. Humans have an inner world, a conscious mind that needs some explaining. And actually, there are really two different things at play in this whole conversation. There is the brain with all of its cells and neurons and electrical activity and synapses and chemicals. And then there is the mind with all of its thoughts and feelings and emotions and memories and decisions. And in this talk, mind and consciousness can be thought of as overlapping. Consciousness is part of the mind. The mind is the bearer of consciousness. And so another key question we need to be asking is, what is the relationship between the mind and the brain? Well, this is the million-dollar question that lies at the heart of this whole conversation. This is the question that has been debated for centuries. It is known as the mind-brain problem. How do you get from brain cells to thoughts? How do you get from electrical activity to that conversation was really difficult today? How do you get from brain chemistry to what it is like to be you? And the perspective driving some of this discussion is that mind and brain are essentially the same thing. People that say you are your brain, they're saying mental processes are brain processes. Conscious states are brain states. And that's really a bit like saying there isn't really anything that it is like to be you. There's only brain activity. But surely this is an absurd way of thinking about human beings that falls short if we ask three really helpful questions of this view. Is it coherent? Can it be lived? And does it have explanatory power? Firstly, is it coherent? Does you are your brain make sense according to its own frames of reference? It does not. You see, the very view that you are your brain cannot even be expressed without presupposing consciousness. It's a bit like saying my first-person perspective on the world is that there is no first-person perspective. You see, to deny consciousness is itself a conscious act. We cannot escape consciousness. This view is incoherent.